Record. Yes. So carry us on.
Okay, should I go for it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so thank you, everyone, for coming. And so today I want to talk about this trial design that we have been trying to work with the team in one of the calls. Uh, I apologize if my network breaks out, but I'll make sure I join back as soon as I can. So for introductions, I think most of you know me, but just for the sake of those who don't, my name is William Nkengui, and I'm a medical doctor. I'm also a public health specialist junior uh, with a major in AP and biostatistics. And I'm currently a TREC, which is Trauma Research Capacity Building Implementation Research Fellow. So that is quick introduction about myself. I'm more interested in data science, implementation science research. And today I know we have clause here in trial design, and so you can always stop me and add in anything you want to add in at any time. But this is the outline of what I want to talk about today, just to introduce people to a little bit familiarize on some common concepts in implementation science, because we are going to talk about effectiveness and implementation hybrid design. So it's important to have at least a brief understanding of some key implementation science terms that I might be need to familiarize with people. But also we'll talk about the hybrid designs themselves. And here we are talking about effectiveness research and implementation research combined together. So we'll see what they are and how many types that we commonly have in the literature. So that means bullet number 3. And also we're going to see some few examples of papers that have used these hybrid designs in the analysis plan as their study designs. So basically, I have a few disclosures to make. As a fellow, I'm receiving funding support from the Trek D43 supplement with Dr. Staton and Dr. Mbaga as multiple PI sites, and also as a trainee from the Trek D43, received funding for my support from this grant, and I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose to this presentation and to this community. So whenever I think about hybrid designs, I prefer to think about these two pictures. So we have a lion on the right here on the left side. So this is the lion with some tigerish, some tigerish, like it's a lion tiger. So it's called a tigon. So it's a hybrid. They somehow, when I was leading in the research, I saw that they somehow have some common gene, and so there is a combination. It's a hybrid. It's a combination of it's a combination of a lion and a tiger. So you can see some tiger elements. And on the right hand side, we have a mule, which is basically a donkey and a horse. One thing about hybrids, when it comes to animals, they cannot really continue the next species. Like the hybrids cannot, I don't know, maybe if someone knows here, they'll tell us, but hybrids really cannot reproduce and have offspring of their own. As far as I know, of course. So now we want to, with this in mind, the only concept I want to highlight here, that whenever we think about hybrid, is that we have two components combined and they end up yielding one thing. So for the case of hybrid designs, and here we'll be talking about two things. So we'll be talking about the implementation design and the effectiveness design, and I will explain what those means in a bit. So hybrid clinical trials are going to be a combination, as I mentioned earlier on, that we are going to have effectiveness research combined with implementation research all together. And why do we need this combination, and why do we need hybrid designs? One of the reasons I could think and I found in literature is that it takes around 17 years to move effective interventions. And these are evidence-based or evidence-proven intervention that have been proven to work on to transfer them from research from research to practice. So this is a huge gap, and only 14% of interventions that have been proven, they reach their intended population. So you can see, like, if we discover, for example, today that this works, in the real world research pipeline, it's going to take around 17 years to move that evidence-based practice into a workable condition. So there's some element of delay, but implementation science as a design tries to build this gap between what we call it the no-do gap. So this is just a picture that shows that research generated for it to be translated to practice, it takes around 17 years. But now the question is, what if we can in the process of trying to generate evidence-based research or evidence-based practices, or at least converting them to the community, and do an implementation-based study that concurrently goes together with the design. So maybe we can shorten this 17 years audacity, we call it, and shorten it. And that is where implementation, effectiveness in implementation research designs come. And I'll show you in the next slide here that this is what happened in the traditional translational research pipeline, that you have a phase which we call it the pre-intervention phase right here, that you're trying to think maybe, can this program work? And then you conduct efficacy studies. Efficacy studies are studies that are conducted in controlled environment. And this is, for example, you are trying to do a clinical trial, maybe you're trying to test maybe a new vaccine, for example, of Marburg wax. So you have to do it in a controlled environment with different phases. And the real question when we're doing efficacy studies is, can a program work? Can this drug work? Can this policy work? So we are really trying to do this research in a controlled environment. The next step in traditional translational pipeline is that we go to what we call effectiveness studies, and this is partly the money of today's talk. That now in a controlled environment, in a clinical trial, this works. Now, does this program work in a real world scenario? For example, if I roll out this drug to the community, to what extent will it work? That is what we call effectiveness studies. And then after effectiveness studies, traditional research pipeline says that now we can conduct implementation-based studies, and they have different phases in the pipeline. Like when you're conducting them, you have to do exploration, preparation, implementation. So this is the translational research pipeline, and this is what gives us the 17 years delays that I was talking about. So, but now, after having this key concept of efficacy research, effectiveness research, and a little bit of hybrid tests, I want to bring something a little bit different, which is going to help us understand more of today's concept. So we'll see moving forward that we have what we call the interventional practice innovation whenever we are thinking about these designs. And the intervention or practice, I will call it the thing that has been shown to work, maybe from efficacy research. And then effectiveness research is going to look at whether the thing, which is the intervention or the practice, for example. So the effectiveness research is going to look at whether the thing works. And then implementation research is going to look at how best to help people or places do the thing. So these are two different things. Sorry about too many things in the wordings, but basically, implementation research looks at, does the thing, what is the best way, all practices that I can help people do the thing, all the evidence proven intervention that can work in a setting. So implementation strategies partly are going to be the stuff that we do to try to help people do the thing. So these are the ways that we are going to use to help people with the thing. So also implementation outcomes are how much and how well they are doing the thing. So this is just some key implementation science phenomena or definitions that I also wanted to highlight before we dive in the different types of hybrid designs. So now I'm assuming my audience understands at least a little bit what implementation science is, what effectiveness, efficacy research is, why at least we need a balance between implementation science and effectiveness research blended together. And so we'll go into more details on this, but basically effectiveness and implementation research hybrid designs are very important because they can help us in simultaneous evaluation of a clinical intervention and its implementation. Like, so this works and how can it be implemented? This works and what is the best strategy for us to implement it? And so what are the outcomes of the implementation? So this is why effectiveness and implementation hybrid designs are very important. So they have mainly two levels of data collection where you're looking at the patient outcomes partly and system outcomes. And I will show you this in a few slides when we look at the examples. But basically, effectiveness and implementation research emphasize they depend on the hybrid designs. Like, when are you going to do more of effectiveness research? When are you going to do more of implementation research? It depends on what hybrid design we are talking. And we're going to see that we have three main types of hybrid designs. We'll see that we have type 1 hybrid design, and we have type 2 hybrid design, and we have type 3 hybrid design. And basically, as we mentioned in these hybrid designs, we're going to have an effectiveness component and an implementation component, which is denoted by symbol I. So depending on what you're doing more, that determines what type of hybrid you are doing. For example, here in the type 1 hybrid trial, the effectiveness research, we still don't have enough evidence that an evidence-based intervention works in a real-world setting. And therefore, we have to generate, first of all, effectiveness evidence while we are trying to explore for the different implementation strategies of the intervention. So in a type 1, we will see, and I have some good examples here, that more of effectiveness research is being conducted. And in type 2 hybrid effective implementation designs, we'll see that we are doing more of effective research. Like, there's a balance, it's 50-50. Like, we are trying to look at if the interventions works in real world setting, and we're trying to balance. So depending on what you're really doing, that is gonna guide you, to see like what type of hybrid design you're talking about. And this is a very helpful study that can help you remind you that. So we'll now go, so this is the same as the previous, is just an emphasis that whenever we are thinking about different hybrid designs, we have to think about what are we doing more? Are we doing more of effectiveness research? That is to say, we don't have evidence that the intervention all the evidence-based practice is working well in real world setting. So we have the hybrid type 1, hybrid type 2, and hybrid type 3. So starting with the first hybrid, type 1 hybrid. So basically in type 1 hybrid, you remember the thing. So we are going to test the thing and explore implementation related factors. Sorry about this. So basically here we are trying to look at intervention effectiveness study plus implementation, trying to explore the implementation strategies. So in here we are describing implementation experience, trying to mainly look at the barriers and facilitators. How might the intervention or the thing need to be adapted going forward, and what is needed to support people or places to do the things in a real-world setting. So while we are generating evidence for effectiveness of our evidence-based intervention, we are also trying to explore some of the implementability by just looking at the barriers and facilitators. But the primary focus in hybrid type 1 trials is effectiveness research. So you can see here, like you're doing more of effectiveness research and less of implementation research. So it's like 80-20%, but the primary focus is really generating evidence of effectiveness of the intervention. So when will you do a hybrid type 1 design? It's basically when the intervention of effectiveness evidence is limited. So intensive focus on implementation might be premature. But also effectiveness study condition offer ideal opportunity to explore implementation issues. Like I mentioned earlier on that here we are trying to look at the implementability, but we are really trying to focus on effectiveness of the intervention in the real world setting. So this is just the same pictures. The first, just to try to emphasize like the primary focus of hybrid type 1 design is effectiveness research. And by effectiveness research, I mean like trying to prove that the intervention works in real world setting. So this is type 1. And this is an example of a study on type 1 hybrid design. And in this study, I'll just assume that we are familiar with pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. Like there was a time when they were trying to investigate long-acting injectable as a pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. So this drug was proven to be efficacious in trials where lesson to computed, but no effectiveness trials. That is to say, in the lab, a long-acting injectable drug was proven to be efficacious in clinical trials, and that is in controlled in. But there was no evidence of effectiveness of these trials. Therefore, for a hybrid design, the goal would be to test the effectiveness of the long-acting pre-exposure prophylaxis provided in-house within STD clinics, sexually transmitted disease clinics, and gather information about implementation. So here they were trying to roll out the intervention into a real-world setting. They tested the effectiveness of this injectable pre-exposure prophylaxis. So they had two arms. Since it's a clinical trial, the pre-exposure prophylaxis, they choose eligible patients in STD clinics because, it's when you go to STD clinics, that's where maybe you can capture people who are at risk highly. And then they randomize the patients into pre-exposure prophylaxis where they were giving them pills, and then they gave them the injectable. But this was already proven to be efficacious in clinical trials. So they were just trying to look at if in real-world setting this was working. So with these trial arms, this was effectiveness research at this point. So the main aims here was to test the comparative effectiveness of the long-acting pre-exposure prophylaxis compared to one-day PrEP, which is an injectable, and they had their own outcomes that they were observing at this point. So the aim too was to gather information about implementation. That is to say, will clinics adopt this? Will patients like this? Will patients accept this? Will there be adherence issues? So this is the second part of the hybrid now, where they were trying to get together preliminary information about the implementability of this injectable long-acting pre-exposure prophylaxis ART. So the third aim was basically to evaluate the relationship between implementation and effectiveness. So you can clearly see that in this study there was the effectiveness part and there was the implementation part in mainly aim 2 and aim 3. So this is an example of a hybrid design that I wanted to highlight here. Okay. So there are more examples on the hybrid design. I'll share the slides and you can go and read about them. But we have this research which was aiming at improving both mood and weight disorders. So you can go and check them at your own time. But they will give you a clear picture of how a hybrid design looks like. So yeah. Okay. So type 2 designs, they're going to be a balance between implementation and effectiveness. And they mainly have a dual focus, trying to look at the intervention effectiveness and looking at implementation of the study. And at least you can have 2 or more strategies that you're trying to look at if they're the best strategies, and you can randomize the groups into different strategies. So it can focus on the study of single implementation study, you cannot decide to randomize. Maybe you're trying to look at just one implementation strategy. And type 2 designs are mainly indicated when intervention effectiveness data is available, though perhaps not for the context. And I would say maybe our PPK would fall under this design in its early phases. I don't know, maybe Ashley will comment on that at the end. But basically, in type 2 hybrids, intervention effectiveness data exists, though maybe not for the context. And the context, I mean the environment. So maybe you have an intervention that has already been proven to be effective and efficacious, maybe in the United States or somewhere else, but you're not sure of that in Tanzania. So you need to gather some evidence of effectiveness, which are context specific. And as you're doing that, you also perform implementation and trying to evaluate an implementation strategy. So that is a type 2 hybrid design. So we already have evidence for effectiveness, but the evidence might not be context specific. So you also gather data on barriers and facilitators to implementation of variable, but here you can also test a strategy, or you can only have one strategy that you're trying to test. So these are some of the considerations that you can take account. I can skip this because of time. But type 2 designs are basically a balance of effectiveness research and implementation research. And in type 2 designs, you are trying to test the thing and to do the thing. So you are testing your intervention and a context, and you're trying to find the best ways, all the best uptakes of all the best implementation strategy that you can use in order for adaptation of the intervention to be really uptaken in that specific context. So these are examples of type 2 hybrid designs that I think maybe if you're interested, you can go and look into them. But the last type of effectiveness implementation design is the type 3 hybrids. And here mainly we are focusing on we are mainly focusing on the implementation part of these designs, and we do the thing and get the information on the thing. But mainly here, the primary focus is we are trying to get the best possible strategy that can work in a context, that can work in that specific context. So we might have in our trial arm, we might have maybe 3 or more strategies that we are really trying to see if they work in that particular context for a specific intervention. So type 3 designs, they largely focus on evaluating implementation strategies rather than effectiveness part. So the unit of analysis is, it can be a provider, maybe a clinic or a system or a strategy, and the outcomes are secondary here. So I forgot to mention earlier that primary outcomes are going to be the outcomes that are the key focus. For example, in the type 1 design, the primary outcome is going to be the effectiveness, and the secondary is going to be the implementation part. And in the second design, it's mainly both. It's 50-50 ish. And in type 3, the primary focus is the strategy, and the secondary is going to be the effectiveness part. So indications on when to do type 3 hybrids is to proceed maybe with implementation studies without completing a full portfolio of effectiveness studies. So we just want to focus on the implementation strategies. And we are mainly interested in exploring how clinical effectiveness might vary by level or quantity of implementation. So these are some of the considerations that maybe we can go through. And these are examples of type 3 hybrid designs that tried together from sources, and they are available. You can Google them and see. But mainly in type 3 designs, the wheel has shifted mainly. We are trying to look at the best way to adapt a strategy and the best way to implement a strategy. And this is going to be our hybrid type 3 designs, where we are really trying to find the best strategy to promote the adoption, integration of an evidence-based practice. So to summarize, type 1 hybrids explore the implementability of an intervention while we are really testing its effectiveness. But the primary focus in type 1 hybrid is to look at the effectiveness, like can this intervention work in real world setting? In type 2 hybrid, we test the implementation strategies and during effectiveness trials. And here you can have a balance between the two, like it can be 50-50. And in type 3, the main focus is on the implementation strategies. So this is a nice table that I like, which really summarizes and it gives you the overall summary of what we just talked about. That in hybrid type 1, the primary aim is really to determine the effectiveness of an intervention. Secondary aim is to understand the context of implementation. So this is the design and this is the aim. In hybrid type 2, we have core aims, core primary aim. As I mentioned, it's 50-50, and hybrid type 3, the primary focus is really to find the best strategy that an intervention can work. So this is again a description of the hybrid type 2. And I wanted to talk about this, but I'll just skip. So I hope I haven't confused you. And this marks the end of my introduction to effectiveness implementation hybrid designs.
That was great, William.
Thank you.
Great presentation, and thank you for doing justice to the languages.
Yes.
Yep.
You were before we go into questions, you were showing on the PPK the slide before. Was that was that related to the grants or something?
No, that I didn't finish that, but it was a type 3 hybrid. So yeah, where we are
Okay.
testing 3 different strategies. So I didn't finish it.
Okay. So you're not ready to discuss. Okay. Yeah, because the first question I was gonna make, I mean, this was really great, and the selection of the reference that the article is also really good. I was gonna say if you could give us any highlights on what you're interested in learning these about the methodologies, and if you are working in any projects that is designing a trial, a habit trial, and if you can comment on how that works.
Yeah, so I was working with the team to try to design a type 3 hybrid that is going to be, we are going to test 3 strategies of disseminating an intervention. So that's why I was interested in this.
I see.
Where we are having 3 strategies to try to, so we had 3 trial arms. So it's a type 3 hybrid. We had 3 trial arms that we wanted to look at what is the best strategy that works in that specific context. So yeah, that's why I wanted to present this job.
I see. And since you're testing multiple strategies, am I correct to assume that this would be a hybrid tree?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. So you see, so I paid attention and I learned. Nice. Thanks.
Great. Yeah. Nice. Ashley said she has a lot to say, but
Yeah, we can keep talking. She's gonna be back soon. I see that Edwin has a question.
Yeah, I think it's a great talk. It's such an interesting. I didn't know even hybrid trials had types, but the types made sense. Though it seems like there is a thread between just how to separate type 1 and type 2. It seems like in the real world, it can just be either. I mean, how can you know if this is you're doing this 50-50, you know? It's how can you be careful and not do the one and the other, like Timothy was saying, PPK is type 2, but I mean it's type 1, but William was suggesting it's type 2. So I think, I don't know if it's important to distinguish them actually in the real world, but maybe that would be a question, a point of discussion. Is it important to distinguish them, or this is just for academic purpose to know, but they might overlap, and it's not an issue.
Yeah, it's as I mentioned earlier, I'm trying really to understand this. I was reading around and it's hard to really distinguish the two, but what I can say is the type 1 is quite direct. I would say, like, you have maybe, for example, a drug works in the lab, but we don't know if it works in the real world. So we have to look at if this drug works in the real world by doing a type 1. We're gathering more evidence on effectiveness. And by effectiveness is it's the opposite of efficacy, which is in a controlled environment. Like the example that I mentioned for the injectable PrEP, like they were working in the lab, but they didn't have evidence, like, and that doesn't make sense really to me, like in the real world setting. So they had to do an effectiveness assessment of the intervention. So they were gathering more evidence on the effectiveness part. So that's a type 1 typical. But in type 2, you have evidence, you have effectiveness evidence partly, but now maybe context specific effectiveness. And by context, we mean like maybe something works somewhere else, but maybe in Mosh it doesn't. So meanwhile, we are trying to look at the implementability of an intervention. We are also gathering information on effectiveness, which is context specific. So that's how we design a type 2. And in type 3, maybe we already have a context specific effectiveness evidence, and now we are trying to gather information on what strategy that works best in that specific context. Can this intervention be delivered by a nurse? Can this intervention be delivered by a community healthcare worker? Can this intervention be delivered by maybe a computer? So we have 3 trial arms in the strategy part, which is the implementation aspect of the design. But as we are doing that, we are also gathering information on the intervention by looking at different outcomes of the patients. Like when in these different trial arms, when this was done by the nurse, when this was done by the community healthcare worker, when this was done by, let's say, a computer, what were the outcomes? Did we have a reduced number of days of alcohol consumption? So, but we are more interested in what strategy works best because we already have evidence on effectiveness, but we cannot ignore the other part. It's a little bit, I'm still learning it too, so I don't know. But
yeah, it makes sense. Seems like there is an hierarchy, and someone can start with type 1 and then go to type 2 and then type 3. Maybe it seems like an hierarchy, some sort of an hierarchy, but also it's from type 3, I think it's quite distinguishable, but type 1 and type 2, what if I have evidence of effectiveness in the lab in the US, and then I'm in Africa now? Do I start with the type 1? Should I just do type 2 because we have effectiveness already? So it can get confusing. Yeah, and what if I have evidence in high income countries, and then in low income countries, there's not even one study. So should we start with type 1 or is it going to be type 2? But I don't think if it's really important to distinguish them in a practical sense. I feel like maybe giving it equal weight or maybe maybe if you find yourself basing on one rather than the other, at the end of the day, it won't have a great impact if you get the good results of your intervention. I don't know what others think about this.
I would think that uh, as long as you are able to justify, this goes through revisions, ethical clearance, or I mean, grant submissions, etc., and you stick to the process you developed, you proposed, I think you can get good results either way, right? One important uh, uh, aspect of the implementation trials and implementation sites overall is fidelity. So if you look at the paper that William shared for his presentation, you're gonna see one of the examples was a trial that was a hybrid type 1, I think. So even less about the implementation, but more about the efficacy. And during the trial, as the trial was going, they were evaluating aspects like provider adherence, aspects like enrollment rates, and some other things. We're getting an echo. Why? Anyway, what I was trying to say is that hmm, for some reason, my mic is okay. That's better. So what I was trying to say is that if they would go into the process of actually only evaluating efficacy and then later on evaluating barriers, facilitators, evaluating provider engagement, etc., which is about implementation, they would lose a lot of time and maybe I mean, miss the opportunity to find something that is actually has efficacy to treat the condition because they didn't consider the other implementation challenges. So that's what I think. Ashley has her.
Hi guys, sorry, I had a very important phone call come in at like as soon as he was finishing, and I have some things to say. So, and I apologize because I couldn't hear the discussion, but let me say a few things. One thing to note, because I find this confusing, especially when you're like preparing a grant, because sometimes you get asked these specific questions, like what phase of clinical trial is this? Don't confuse hybrid types with clinical trial phases. Sometimes that's confusing because often we're doing hybrid trials. So we might have a clinical trial type and we might also have a hybrid type. So don't let those things get confused because you might be talking about like a phase 3 trial, but that's not necessarily a implementation hybrid type 3, for example. Just a note. I think a couple of things that we kind of sometimes lose sight of when we're evaluating what type is this, which is sometimes it becomes a little bit semantics, one type or the other, but keep in mind what William said, which is it's really about the unit of analysis is a big piece of it and the data that's collected. So that brings me back to Timothy's comment and a little bit of what I heard, a little bit of things, but just to want to set things straight. So Timothy said then PRACT is a type 1 hybrid. That's not quite right. I wouldn't call PRACT a hybrid trial. And let me tell you why. Because again, when we go back to the unit of analysis and the data that's collected, we don't really, and I know not everybody is in and out with PRACT like somebody like Timothy or others are, but PRACT, it is a pragmatic trial, it's a clinical trial, and it's an adaptive trial, which gives a little bit of uniqueness, but the unit of analysis is the patient level outcomes. And while we might think we can say, often when we talk about effectiveness, we think it empowers us to say something about implementation because we did implement the trial, but we're not actually collecting implementation outcomes necessarily, right? Or at least we didn't set out, it's not one of our aims to collect implementation outcomes or to test specific implementation strategies. We're not trialing different strategies. Okay, so keep that in mind. It can be a little bit confusing. And also note that like when William talked about the type 3, he said that clinical outcomes are secondary, right? And let's also not forget that there is a whole other realm of implementation research, which is not hybrids, right? Hybrids are one part, and we think they're a smart way to go about things. But there's not really much wrong with a pure implementation trial, which like how type 3's clinical outcomes are secondary. In a true implementation study, often clinical outcomes might not even be collected. They're only measuring implementation. Now, if you're getting your clinical outcomes at the patient level and you're measuring things about implementation strategies and implementation outcomes, then you're getting into hybrid territory. But once they start to sort of neglect, for lack of a better word, I'm not saying that there's any moral value to leaving out those clinical things. Sometimes it makes things a lot easier to measure when you just say, I don't even need the patient level data. I already know this intervention works. I have the effectiveness data, so I don't need it again. For example, in a particular case, if it was something that's very established clinically, I don't need to know that anymore at this point in time that PrEP works. We know PrEP works. The question now we need to know is, how do we get providers to prescribe, or how do we get hospitals to refer to programs? Like, that's implementation research. And so don't forget that that's a whole nother option that we haven't talked about. Williams really focused on hybrids because we think they're great, and it can be a little confusing to navigate. So don't lose sight of those other big picture parts of the realm that also are out there.
That
Yeah.
was very helpful. So, thank you.
One thing that also maybe speaks to the advantages or the usability, I would say, of these designs. So if you are looking at governments or policy or basically things that are implemented without actually a lot of testing, a lot of evaluation, these hybrid designs can be a good thing to say, hey, okay, I gotta implement this new policy in my hospital or in my population, in my state, whatever. But at the same time, let's do it and let's still keep track of some effectiveness of some uh, a balance between those, because sometimes that's what happens, right? That's not the ideal, but that's what happens.
And like, I think most of us aren't working on like really basic clinical science. Like most of us are working on translational things or even like hybrid implementation things. And in that case, like sometimes we consider it as a bit of an after thought about including some implementation outcomes in our studies. So think about those kinds of things, because sometimes we really want to add that. And that's really nice, especially for like student projects, because a lot of times student projects have to be short in duration. So you may be challenged even to get the power that you need to say something about your clinical outcomes, for example. But if you have a nice secondary outcome about acceptability or satisfaction, if it's a good measure, those kind of measures obviously kind of have some bias towards yay saying. But if you can consider some kinds of implementation outcomes, even cost can be an implementation outcome, which is really important, of interventions themselves. Think about those things up front, because they can actually be quite useful in the end. Even things that are like really easy to measure. Continuing, sorry, like for example, the time it takes to do an intervention. So when I'm thinking about the brief interventions in PrACT, because that's all we ever think about in this office, we don't measure necessarily the length of an intervention or the number of hours the staff spend doing the paperwork. that's something that's could have some value. And when it comes to implementation, so that we can go to policymakers at small and big levels and say, look, this is the human resource investment. You should do this or whatever, advocate for it.
Yeah, because I think those can be barriers like to intervention, like time spent doing paperwork. So yeah. Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I don't see any more questions in the chat, Joel. So back to you now.
All right. This was a great presentation and great discussion again. Thank you, William. Thank you, everyone. So as we've been talking, we have a new schedule for the presentations coming up. So if you're interested, you can look it up on the Gemini spreadsheet. Let me just stop the recording first.